Ship engine baffled top engineers. Then the Navy's last hope was an 82-year-old man. Top Navy engineers stood frozen. A multi-million-dollar warship engine refused to work. Just when all hope seemed lost, an 82-year-old retired Navy mechanic walked in calm, steady, and focused. What happened next? You won't believe it. Like, subscribe, and let's dive into the story. The sun had barely risen over the Norfolk Naval Shipyard when alarms blared across Dock 7. The USS Liberty, one of the Navy's most advanced warships, was preparing for a top-secret deployment. Everything was running like clockwork until the heart of the ship, its million-dollar propulsion engine, suddenly choked and shut down at first. The crew thought it was a glitch. Reboot the mainframe. Someone yelled, but the engine remained silent, not a hum, not a pulse. The ship's engineers swarmed the engine room like bees. Chief Petty Officer Daniels crouched beside the massive console, flipping through error codes with lightning speed. This can't be right. No error messages, just a dead system, he muttered, eyes darting between blinking screens and motionless machinery. Lieutenant Harris, one of the Navy's most promising young minds, ran diagnostics for the 5th time in 20 minutes. Nothing. The readings showed normal fuel levels, stable pressure, clean circuitry. On paper, everything was perfect. But the engine was stone cold. A tense silence took over the control deck. Then another alarm. Backup systems failing. Someone called out. With each passing hour, hope thinned. The USS Liberty had a vital mission, one that couldn't afford delays. Missiles, surveillance equipment, satellite links hinged on that engine roaring back to life. By noon, news of the failure had reached Admiral Conrad himself, a strict no-nonsense leader. He marched into the control room flanked by senior officers. What's the situation? He asked sharply. Daniels stepped forward. Sir, we're baffled. The engine just quit. No warning, no alerts. Every test comes back clean, but she won't start. Conrad's jaw tightened. You've got 48 hours to fix it, or I'll call someone who can. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. 48 hours wasn't enough to rebuild or replace, not for a system this complex. Then someone muttered something under their breath, just loud enough to be heard. Maybe we should call the old man. Heads turned. Harris raised a brow. You mean Jenkins? That old mechanic? Daniels chuckled bitterly. That man once tuned a battleship with a screwdriver and a prayer. Conrad didn't laugh. He just stared at the silent engine, thinking. You've got your orders? He said. And if it comes to it, we'll call the legend. As the lights dimmed across Dock 7 that night, the once proud USS Liberty sat in silence. An unstoppable machine stopped by something no one could see. But the sea was waiting, and time was running out. That evening, with the hum of failed machinery still echoing in their heads, Admiral Conrad met with his senior officers behind closed doors. The atmosphere was tense. Coffee sat untouched. Charts lay scattered across the table, useless without a running engine. We've brought in the best, the Admiral said. MIT grads? System engineers? AI diagnostics? Still no results? Lieutenant Harris looked down, embarrassed. Sir, we've run every test 3 times. Nothing's working. It's like the engine doesn't want to cooperate. That engine isn't just steel and wires. It's attitude. And right now, it's angry, said Daniels, half joking, half serious. Admiral Conrad took a long breath, then reached for an old black notebook. The spine was cracked. Inside it were names from years past, men and women who served with brilliance, who carried more knowledge in their fingers than modern systems could replicate. He flipped to a single name, underlined 3 times. Walter Jenkins. You're not serious, Harris said, blinking. He hasn't been in service since. What, the late 90s? He was fixing ships before you were born, Conrad replied. He rebuilt an entire destroyer engine in the middle of a hurricane, saved us during the Pacific blackout with nothing but duct tape and his hearing. He's 82, Daniels reminded them, and still sharper than half the base. Conrad said firmly. He listens to machines like they're old friends. If anyone can get Liberty back in the water, it's him. The decision was made. The Navy placed the direct call. Far away in a quiet neighborhood in Chesapeake, Virginia, a dusty landline rang inside a modest single-story home. Walter Jenkins, seated at his kitchen table, polishing an old wrench, picked up the receiver without hesitation. I figured you'd be calling, he said with a gravelly chuckle. Tell that stubborn engine I'm on my way. The next morning, just before dawn, a black government sedan pulled up outside the shipyard. Out stepped Walter Jenkins, tall, sturdy, wearing a faded blue coverall and a U.S. Navy veteran cap. A stethoscope hung casually from his neck. He looked nothing like the engineers inside. No flashy badges, no digital tools. Just a confident walk and calloused hands that had turned wrenches longer than most of the officers had been alive. A few young recruits snickered as he passed. That's the guy, one whispered. He looks like he came to fix a tractor, not a warship. But Walter said nothing. His eyes were locked on the massive gray figure of the USS Liberty, silent and still like a stranded beast. He approached Admiral Conrad, nodded once, and said, "Show me the heart of the ship." Without another word, he was led toward the engine room where silence now felt louder than any alarm ever could. Inside the engine room of the USS Liberty, the air was thick with tension, oil fumes, and unspoken doubt. Walter Jenkins stepped through the heavy doors, paused, and looked around. The room was buzzing with nervous energy. Dozens of engineers stood aside, arms crossed, clipboards in hand, watching the old man with skeptical eyes. He said nothing, just nodded to the officers, and slowly walked up to the engine. It loomed over him like a mechanical giant, its polished pipes and tangled cables reflecting the overhead lights. "Still the same as I remember," he muttered, placing a hand gently on the chrome surface. "Different tech, same attitude?" Then he reached into his jumpsuit pocket and pulled out a battered gold stethoscope polished by age and habit. The room fell completely silent. No clicking keyboards, no muttered complaints, just the sound of Walter placing his stethoscope against the engine with reverence. Tap, tap, silence, knock. He closed his eyes and moved the stethoscope slowly from pipe to pipe, cylinder to cylinder, stopping every few seconds to listen. Occasionally he'd tilt his head, raise an eyebrow, or murmur, The younger engineers shifted uncomfortably. One of them whispered, "Is he really diagnosing an engine? By ear?" But Walter was laser-focused. He tapped lightly on a metallic valve and frowned. "That's not right," he said under his breath. "You're hiding something, girl." He reached behind the unit and felt around the piping. Then he leaned in and whispered almost affectionately to the machine, "It's okay, I'm here now." The murmurs behind him grew louder. "Should we step in?" a tech whispered to Lieutenant Harris. This isn't exactly protocol, but Harris raised a hand. Something about the way Walter moved, the confidence, the grace, it felt like watching a surgeon in an operating room, not a mechanic. Finally, Walter straightened up and turned to Admiral Conrad. "It's not your wiring, it's not the fuel intake or the software," he said firmly. "Your problem is mechanical, but just barely. There's a hairline crack in the auxiliary intake valve. It's tiny, too small for sensors, but big enough to throw the pressure calibration off. That's why your diagnostics are clean, but the engine won't fire." The room was silent. Then Lieutenant Harris stepped forward. "With respect, sir, there's no visible crack. We've checked every component." Walter simply nodded. "You've checked what your eyes can see. I checked what the engine can feel." He handed the stethoscope to Harris. "Put it here, and listen closely." Harris hesitated, but obeyed. He leaned in, adjusted the stethoscope, and suddenly, his eyes widened. "Inconsistent. The pulse is off." Walter smiled. "Exactly. She's trying to breathe through a cracked lung." The team sprang into action. Under Walter's supervision, they dismantled the auxiliary valve, and there it was, just as he said. A hairline crack, barely visible even under a flashlight. Gasps filled the engine room. How the hell did he know that? One whispered. Admiral Conrad stared in awe. He didn't just fix the engine, he understood it. The replacement valve was installed within the hour, and the engine was carefully reassembled under Walter's watchful eye. No shouting, no chaos, just precision. "Nice and steady," Walter advised as the engineers tightened the last bolts. "This ain't a race, it's a conversation. Let the ship know she's safe again." The room was still filled with a strange kind of tension, not the panic of earlier, but something deeper. Anticipation, reverence. Even the skeptics from earlier stood in silent respect now, realizing they were witnessing something rare. Walter didn't ask for computers or simulations. He only requested one thing. "Give me silence," he said, raising his hand. The technicians powered down every monitor. No buzzing, no clicks, just the low hum of lights and the heavy breath of the people watching. He placed his stethoscope one final time on the intake housing. His eyes closed, his brow furrowed, and then, a nod. "She's ready," he said, stepping back. Admiral Conrad gave the command. "Start her up." One of the engineers turned the ignition key. For a moment nothing. Then, with a deep growl from her belly, the engine sputtered, choked, and then let out a full-bodied roar that shook the floor. A clean, rhythmic pulse followed, stronger, steadier than it had sounded in weeks. The room erupted. Cheers, claps, laughter. A few officers even exchanged high fives. It was more than just a technical victory, it was a moment of redemption, unity, and awe. One technician leaned against a wall, staring in disbelief. He brought her back, like she responded to him. Walter didn't celebrate. He simply took a step forward, placed his hand gently on the engine's side, and whispered, "Told you I'd find it." Admiral Conrad walked over, saluted him, and extended a hand. "You didn't just fix an engine, Jenkins. You saved a mission, and reminded us why we still need men like you." Walter shook his head. "You don't need me, you need to listen. These machines, they're not just metal. They have memory, rhythm, soul." That night, the USS Liberty began final prep for launch. Every system checked out. Her engine purred like a lion under control. She was ready. Walter didn't stick around for the glory. He quietly packed his tools, tucked the stethoscope into his front pocket, and headed for the base exit. A young ensign ran up and asked, "Sir, what was the trick? How'd you know?" Walter paused and smiled. "It's not a trick, son. It's a relationship." Word of what happened spread like wildfire through the Navy. Within hours, Walter Jenkins was a legend all over again, not just in the engineering department, but across bases, ships, and academies. Photos of him standing beside the humming engine were pinned to bulletin boards. A clip of the moment the engine restarted went viral on internal Navy networks. Young officers whispered his name with a mixture of awe and regret for ever doubting him. Walter, however, didn't chase the attention. He was offered a ride back home that evening, but he politely declined. Instead, he spent the night on base. Sitting alone in the empty engine room with a cup of black coffee and his stethoscope across his lap, one young engineer, Ensign Riley, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Jenkins, could you teach me? I mean, not just the machines, but how to hear like you do." Walter smiled warmly. "Hearing's easy. Listening, that's the hard part. You gotta listen with respect, even to silence." Over the next few days, Walter stayed on base. Not because he had to, but because young minds wanted to learn. He led small sessions, not with slides or manuals, but with stories, gestures, and the occasional tap of his stethoscope. "An engine will always tell you what's wrong," he told them. "The question is, are you humble enough to hear it?" The Navy honored him with a lifetime engineering commendation in a ceremony attended by admirals, engineers, and enlisted sailors alike. But Walter kept the medal in a drawer. It wasn't what he came for. Before leaving, he was asked to sign the engine room wallin, old Navy tradition. He scribbled his name, and, underneath it, for simple words, "She just needed listening." As he left the base that final time, a convoy of junior engineers stood at attention and saluted him not because he wore a uniform, but because he reminded them what service truly meant. In the months that followed, his name became part of Navy curriculum. The Jenkins method was used as a case study in both engineering schools and leadership seminars, not because it relied on technology, but because it relied on intuition, respect, and connection. Some called him a genius, others, a miracle worker, but Walter Jenkins, he just smiled whenever anyone asked what made him so special. "I'm just an old man," he'd say, who never stopped listening.